but you can make swords that if you clank it up against the bronze sword, it's going to break through the bronze sword and you're going to win the battle. So the Egyptians got their asses kicked because they were in the freaking Neolithic Age or the Bronze Age, I can't remember, and the Hittites were in the Iron Age. So they got their asses kicked, but then they got their heads screwed on straight. And then Ramses too, Ramses the Great, he's called Ramses the Great because he went out and he fought the Hittites back in like, when did Ramses live? Drawing a blank. Was it like 1000 BC or something? About the same time as David? I can't remember, dude. But anyways, he's called the Great because he took back parts of the empire. He basically he tied the Hittites in this giant battle, but he basically won because the Hittites were invading and they couldn't invade after that. So they both got to declare victory, or at least he got to declare victory, and that's when he got to make all those big statues and stuff. A lot of which the aliens obviously helped him make, because that big statue of Ramses is fucking like 100 feet tall, carved out perfectly out of a single piece of granite. How the hell did they stand that thing up? There's no way. They're gods. Orion, whoever their god was, Osiris came down and freaking put that up for him. Good job, my son Ramses. Seriously, they can't even stand it up. They have a museum down there in southern Egypt. They just built the museum around the statue because they can't even stand that thing up. It's so big. It's like 1,000 tons. You should check it out. Yeah, so that's when they got into their next level, the Egyptians. The Hittites were pretty good fighting force. They had wicker chariots who could take 2 chariot riders on it. And the whole chariot only weighed 75 pounds. So they could go really fast, and they could shoot. They had arrow bows that could shoot really far. They could shoot off, when they ran, they'd do all their chariots, and then they'd turn, and they'd go out, and so the guy would shoot the arrows. They could shoot off, if you had all the, on the front lines, if you had all the chariots together, they could shoot off 1,000 rounds a minute, and an Apache helicopter shoots out 1,200. So it was kind of like each one of those arrows could hit you pretty hard. So it's kind of like an Apache helicopter coming in at you and just, And I think some of those were even armor piercing. So yeah, they were a good fighting force. But yeah, so anyways, so about then, Solomon was doing his thing, but he was kind of losing popularity because he was taxing a lot to build his temple, and he was there were lots of other people doing trade with them at that time because they had kind of their own little kingdom going, and probably doing trade with the Axumites or the Shebites, wherever the hell they were. So he was letting the traders, pray to their own gods within the borders of Israel, and that pissed off a lot of Israelis. They were like, what are you doing letting them pray to their own God? You should smash their God. They have to pray to our God and stuff. But anyways, he taxed a lot. So when he died, his son Jeroboam and then Rehoboam had arguments over who was going to control the kingdom, or Rehoboam took off a whole bunch of his followers who didn't want to be part of the kingdom of Israel because they didn't want to get taxed as much, and they wanted to also kind of have their own control because their leaders, the Jewish leaders, the rabbis. Traditionally, you have 2 rabbis in the Israelite kingdom, and which means that monotheism or dual theism, or whatever that's called, or dual archy, doesn't really work because one guy always kills the other guy, and so I don't know if that had something to do with it, but yeah, they do want to get taxed, so they went off and started their own kingdom. So that's when you had the kingdom of Judah in the south and the kingdom of Israel in the north. The kingdom of Israel was where the rebels went, and then the kingdom of Judah was in the south, and I think the kingdom of Judah had Jerusalem as their capital, in the land of Judea. And they lasted like 260 years, all the way up until the year 560. And the Israelites had theirs for like Judea had theirs for like 500 years, and Israeli for like 250 years until they were captured by the Babylonians back in 760. And they went and were captured by them, and then like 250 years later, the Judites, the kingdom of Judah, was finally captured. Or maybe it was the king of Israel. I think it was the king of Judah. who was actually, the old eldest son, who was the guy who was supposed to take over the throne from Solomon. Kingdom of Judah was finally captured by, I think it was like the Babylonians. But yeah, they were captured for a while, but they were, having their prophets going on the whole time, and this is the time of, writing the Old Testament. And at one point they were captured by, they had Cyrus the Great, who was the founder of one of those Babylonians. I think their capital was in Babylon, and he had a huge. He was actually the first who had like an actual empire, huge empire that stretched from India all the way to like Greece, and he built roads that went all the way across the empire. He built. I think he was the one who built Persepolis, which is in modern day Turkey. They moved their capitals around. The capital was in Persepolis for a while, but he had like, I can't remember the order, but he had like Artaxerxes and Xerxes, and these are the guys who took over, who tried to attack the Greeks. But anyway, one of those guys, and maybe it was Cyrus or his son Xerxes, was the king when the time of Esther, who was it was when all the Jews were taken captive as slaves, working in Babylon, and he had a queen who he fell in love with, the queen who was Esther, who he didn't know was Jewish, and then he found out she was Jewish. So then she asked him if she could do him a favor and just let her people go, or not, or at least protect them from the other people who didn't like them and kill the bad guys. I think it's let them people go. So he let them all go back to like Jerusalem. And so they got to kind of start their own little kingdom again. And so that's a book in the Bible, Esther. So, yeah, so anyways, like Artaxerxes or Xerxes tried to take over Greece. I think it was the Battle of Marathon was one of them, but they kept getting their asses kicked because the Greeks, even though they were all the different city-states, this is in like the year like 480, 490 BC or something like that, they could coalesce. They all spoke the same language. They had the same religion, the same gods, the same culture. I mean, they all got together once every 4 years and had the Olympic Games, officially starting in like the year 790 BC, lasting all the way up until the year 360 AD, which when the Romans stopped it because they thought it wasn't Christian enough. So for a long time, and even before that, they were having Olympic Games, and not just in Olympia. They were having games. They had the Delphian Games, and at Delphi they have this huge Colosseum or Circus Maximus type of field area up on the side of the mountain. And then other ones did too. So they were like a unit. Only they were all individual city-states, like independent of each other. And they were, a lot of them were democracies. Like Athens was a democracy starting in like the year, I mean, they had like kings, and then they went into having kings that had terms of 10 years, and then they moved it down to kings who only had a term of 1 year, who were elected. And I mean, so advanced. And they even had Greeks. I think, the 400s BC is pretty much when the golden age of Greece was, but they had one Greek who knew the world was round, and he knew how big the world was. He did an experiment with like a standing tree, and based on the size of the shadow from a given time of day, you could, comparing it with doing the same thing with smaller spheres that you have, somehow, I don't know how he did it, figured out how big the world was, and that it's round and how big the world was. And then another like Greek did it later, I think in the Islamic world, one of those Islamic guys back in the 1100s or something figured it out, how big the world was, to within like 400 miles of circumference. I mean, these guys, people knew that the world was round before Copernicus, who was the one who gave the idea to Galileo. It was just that I should upload a video called The Evil Catholic Church, because they retarded advancement a lot, all in the name of their freaking power struggle. But anyways, they knew a lot of stuff. I mean, one of those philosophers, like they had the Platonian idea of Plato was dissecting animals and looking at their organs, and they had Aristotelitism, I think it's called. It's a kind of philosophy where you look at the facts. It's basically the forerunners of science. You look at the facts of something, you look at the data, and then you come up to a conclusion, and you do that over and over again, and you find out that's what the world is like, you know? And they had the democracy back then, so they were really advanced. And you can tell because they made all of those different, I mean, the structures they made the Parthenon, the Greek Parthenon up there in Athens. I saw it. It was huge. The stones are like as big as my car, and they're cut perfectly, and they come up perfectly. And you know, they knew how to make it the columns look straight. You know, they knew about the optical illusion you have if you make it like that. It actually looks straight instead of looking like it gets narrow in the middle. And just, I mean, engineering. They made the Archimedes screw, with running water and. Well, not just the Greeks. I mean, the Persians too made some cool stuff. Like they had like vending machines. You put in a coin, the coin falls down, and then it makes the thing spew out water by like moving things. And I mean, they had like statues that would like, you know, spew out water and then like move around and do stuff. I mean, but it was because they could consolidate. But they had, I guess, you know, the Persians and the Greeks had different ideas of what a civilization was, and the Persians were a lot more based on a capital. You know, one king who could control all the city and be more decisive that way. And the Greeks had a more different system where you don't have one king who says everything, and you know, because everybody's literate. You know, democracies work great when everybody's literate. They don't work as good when you get somebody when everybody's dumb and then they make all stupid decisions. But they were smart because they had writing, they had, you know, Greek writing, and they could communicate and stuff. But anyways, they had, you know, the Persians and the Greeks had different ways of doing stuff. So the Persians thought that they would take over Greece and show them how it was done. But they got their asses kicked. You know, the Battle of Marathon, they came in and they beat off. Was that the Battle of 300 from 300 Spartans, where they got the Spartans over there, Leonidas and his 300 guys with some of the, like 100 of the other guys. Came and fought him off, bottled him up and fought him off, where the other guy ran like 127 miles in like 2 days. Or like, I don't know where that, or the other story is he ran like 26 miles, and that's why the marathon was 26 miles. But anyways, and then he arrived and he died. But, and then there was another battle. See, I don't have those battles all like in line and memorized exactly when and why, but there's another battle, where they had this naval battle, and all the Greeks had like 300 ships built, these triremes, which are these smaller rowboats where they could go really fast. They had like, I don't know, like 100 guys in there or something who could row really fast. Like the porthole of the oar was only an inch off the water, and they could just like crank it. And they had these big spikes built right at waterline on the front of the boat, so they would like ram these big Persian boats. And the Persians weren't such good at seafarers. They bought sea boats, but they were kind of afraid of water. They thought water was evil and stuff, so they got themselves boxed in these like narrow straits where they couldn't all surround the Greeks and beat them by numbers. And so the Greeks like zoomed around and poked their boats and sunk them and, you know, scared them off and basically, you know, sunk all their ships, so then they'd swim ashore and kill them on the shore. But one girl, I can't remember what her name, but she was the captain of a ship in Persia, and she got away, so then she was like the hero. But anyways, yeah, the Persians never took over Greece. But one of the guys, Xerxes or whoever, when he arrived in Athens had been abandoned. They had taken to higher ground, ready to fight, and that pissed him off. So he burnt Athens to the ground. And I guess that's something that Persians didn't do. I guess Persians were pretty advanced at the time, and they would just take people over and then just take over the administration and call it a day. But he burnt it this time, and he tried to rebuild it the next day. But I think that may be the motivation for why Alexander the Great burnt down Persepolis. They were remembering how they burnt down Athens like 200 years beforehand. But yeah, anyways, that was the golden age of Greece. After they fought them off, they were like, oh, cool, we're the Greeks, we're badass. But we need to make an alliance, make sure we keep an alliance in case those Greeks try to come back, because those Persians try to come back, because they tried to come back twice. Xerxes came back, and then like his son, what was Xerxes II, came back like 30 years later, and so they're like, all right, if these guys come back, I think I mean, some of the accounts say that he had like 300,000 people in his army. Xerxes did, and he even made a bridge across the Strait of whatever that's called, you know, from Istanbul to Asia, which is like a half mile or something. He made a bridge out of his boats to get his army across, and so they wanted to take that seriously. So they started the Delian League. They started on this island called Delos. This is one of those islands because it was a neutral island. Nobody owned it, and they would make this huge treasury that they would all save money out there, that they would all come and grab to buy armies to fight off the Persians next time the Persians attacked. And the people who were supposed to be in charge, or the number one guys from the Delian League, were the Athenians. Pericles was the leader, but he was like a really good leader, and he had he's the one who made the Parthenon, and but he turned into a tyrant. He got all the money from Delos and he brought it to Athens, and he embezzled the money from Delos and used that money to build the Parthenon, and that pissed a lot of people off. They said, what are you doing spending the money on this thing? We should use it on the war, and it's ugly anyways. And it was kind of like people didn't like the Eiffel Tower when it was being built. So yeah, he built it, and they ended up pissing off the Spartans, and they had battles and battles with the Spartans, and then the Spartans ended up winning, because the Athenians kind of had an overcrowded city, and they got a plague. I think they got the plague because they were getting sieged by Athens. And so then their water got tainted, and they all got the plague, and they all died, including their leader, Pericles. But right after Pericles lived, that's when the really famous Greeks, or maybe it was before or during, the life of Pericles. That's when a lot of those Greeks, who were pretty much all Athenians, lived. That's when Socrates lived. Now he's really famous because he invented Socratic questioning. He would like try to have an argument with somebody by asking them questions. And then help them unravel their ideas just simply by asking them questions, which was, I guess, a new idea back then. Since back before then, maybe it was kind of like the king tells you what he believes, and you just listen to him, and it's like, okay, the gods say this, and okay, that's that, the great prophet says this, okay. But he was like asking people questions and making them question stuff, and he pissed off the rich people. I don't know exactly why. I think he was having a problem with the debauchery of like Pericles and the older people, the rich people, like wasting money or something, and so they charged him with corrupting the youth, and they had him drink hemlock until he died. But he had a student called Plato. We all have heard of Plato. He was a big scholar. He was the first guy to talk about Atlantis. Plato's grandfather, Critias, told Plato that his grandfather, whose also name was Critias, I think, spent some time in Egypt, and became privy to these legends of Atlantis, which were these people who lived beyond the gates of Hercules, which is the Strait of Gibraltar, who was an island nation, who were the most powerful nation in the world, but they had a war with, but they tried to take over the whole world, and they had a war with Athens. And Athens won. Athens beat them, and then they had a big tidal wave, and they all died. And that happened in 9,000 years before Socrates or Plato. And now I think, some people might be, oh, you're stupid. 9,000 years. Well, it could have been like 100 years. I don't know, man. They're pretty good at their numbers back then. I mean, that one Greek guy, he knew the size of the earth. They didn't have Arabic numerals and stuff, but I mean, that's when what's his name, Pythagoras, lived back then. Pythagoras was actually a contemporary of the Buddha. He lived at the same exact time as the Buddha. And I think the Buddha actually lived at Pythagoras, the Buddha, Lao Tzu, and Confucius. Okay, Lao Tzu, the inventor of Taoism, they all lived at the exact same time. About 500 BC. Born at about 515 BC, dying at around 460 BC. Exact same time. Lao Tzu and Confucius hung out with each other. Lao Tzu told Confucius that he better check himself before he wrecks himself, because he was pissing off all the rich people by like being over judgmental and stuff. But anyways, I guess I'll talk about that later. But Pythagoras, he was a good mathematician. He came up with the Pythagorean theorem, like how to figure out the square root of the circle or something, or to find out the hypotenuse of the triangle. I don't know. But anyways, they were pretty good at math. So, if Plato says it was 9,000 years beforehand, then believe him. It was 9,000 years beforehand, right? Okay, so anyways, and then Plato had a student called, and then he kind of started philosophy. So then like a couple hundred years, Aristotle lived. Aristotle was the tutor of Alexander the Great, which was a couple hundred years later. But so yeah, basically the Athenians were in control, and then the Spartans won, and then the Spartans were actually in control, and they had their kind of empire. Spartans had a really interesting political system. It wasn't like democracy, like the Athenians, where they, and the Athenian democracy lasted a long time. They had their 1 year, king, like where they have the elected president who would only be president for 1 year. They had it from like 400 BC. I can't remember. Maybe it was 700 BC. Well, it was like 10 years. It was first it was for life, and then it was 30 years, and then it was 10 years. They were called the Deciminians or whatever. And then it was 1 year from like 300 BC or something, all the way until like 380. I mean, after they got attacked, taken over by the Romans in 160 BC, the Romans let them keep their whole like leadership system, to control the province of Greece, all the way up until like the end of the Roman Empire. So, where they would mark, they had the king's list. I have it on my site. Yeah, so that was pretty cool. And another cool thing that they had was this thing called ostracism. And like every like year or something, I don't know how many years, but maybe like every year, they would all vote to kick a guy out for 10 years. And I mean, even if there was nobody who they hated, they just did it as a matter of tradition, just to get in the habit of not letting anybody become too powerful. And there was one like general who was responsible for the whole designing of the army that defeated the Persians. He got ostracized because he was so popular. They were like, oh, okay, well, he's too popular. Let's ostracize him. So they kicked him out of Greece, and he had to go to the Persians, whose asses he kicked. And he went to the Persians and became a Persian, and was like a politician in the Persian army, and learned Persian for the rest of his life. But anyways, the Spartans have kind of an interesting political system. They have they had these two ruling families. Now, it wasn't just one ruling family, but it was two ruling families, and for somehow this worked for hundreds of years, like 1,000 years or something. One ruling family was better than the other ruling family, though. It was kind of like the junior ruling family and then like the big time ruling family, and but there was like this guy's son became the next king, and this guy's son became the next king. But it was the Aegeans who were the number one ruling family, followed by the like Aenenians or something, who were like the other ruling family. But he would be like the boss for like his life, and then his son would be the boss, and so that was kind of interesting. But they had like an interesting idea in that they were badasses and they fought, but the citizens were the ones who were fought. They didn't have like a professional army. Like the professional army was actually the citizens, and they had slaves, but the slaves weren't allowed to have any weapons. But like they were like really racist. Like they couldn't they wouldn't allow anybody else to become to move in and be a Spartan. Like you had to be a blood Spartan. Maybe they were like a different race. Maybe they looked different from everybody else. I don't know, but like they had to be the Spartans, and they had their slaves that they took over from the other groups, who they would be their slaves. But a slave could never own a weapon or fight. And so when they go off and they'd fight, they'd lose warriors. And they ended up, since the only people who could fight could be the Spartans, the Spartan population dwindled, and they couldn't make enough babies. Maybe they didn't have enough polytheism or polyamorism, whatever that's called. They didn't have enough wives to pop up enough babies, but their numbers dwindled, and then they had a freaking slave revolt who kicked their asses, and Sparta became no more. So that didn't work out so well in the long run, but they were assholes. I mean, in order to become a Spartan, you had to kill like 3 people or something like that, or you had to kill somebody, at least one person you had to just kill, and then it's like, okay, you're bad enough to be a Spartan. And like in that movie 300, they actually did do that. They would throw kids up if a baby Spartan was born deformed, they just throw them in the ditch. And then I think they would have to, yeah, they'd kick the kid out in the mountains, and he'd have to like fend for himself for like a month or something, and then he could come back. So Spartans were badasses. I mean, when they, when the Greeks, when the Greeks were first attacked by the Persians, they sent an envoy out to Sparta, and they're like, you know, Spartans, we need you. We're gonna get attacked by like 300,000 Persians. So the Spartans were like, yeah, tell them we're not going to attack because we're having our week-long like celebration where we're not supposed to fight or anything. So they hung out for like 5 days or something, or like a week. Just like, yeah, we'll join that battle where they're fighting for their lives, you know, for the whole of Greece. And we're just going to hang out here for like 5 more days because it's like against our religion. But then when the time came, they made it from Sparta all the way to, I think it was like a couple 100 miles north of Athens, or maybe it was to Athens. I think, yeah, they made it from like Sparta to Athens, which is like 120 miles in like 2 days, or 150 miles in like 2 days. It was just like running in sandals with like 60 pounds. I mean, running 60 miles a day in full armor. I mean, they were badasses. They were probably totally muscular and jacked, and they were short though. They were like 5'5" or something. I mean, Greeks today. One idea. Now, let me make a really go get on a side tangent here, in that the Greeks, pretty much the people of today, because I know a lot of people are going to ask this in their minds. What did people look like in the past? You know, what race was were the Egyptian pharaohs? What did they look like? Well, I think generally the good rule of thumb is people in the past looked like they do now. You know, the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, are Greeks of today. You know, I mean, think about it this way. Jesus Christ lived 2,000 years ago. If you make a generation 30 years, you know, you're 30 years old, that's when you have kids. Become 30 years old, that's when you have kids. If you're going to basically use that rule of thumb, whether it's true or not, it's only 33 generations. 2,000 divided by 33 is 30. It's only 33 generations between here and Jesus. It's not that long. I mean, you could count 33 on the sets of 3 people's fingers. I mean, you probably have like 33 like good friends in your life. You know, I mean, that's a number that you can intimately, if you're going to talk about, you know, your grandfather and your grandfather, it's only 33 grandfathers all the way at the time of Jesus. So basically what I'm saying is the Greeks of today are pretty much the same as the Greeks from 2,000 years ago. You know, they look the same because they were saying the Greeks of 2,000 years ago were short people. Well, if you go to Greece today, Greeks are short little people. Same people. You know, they were saying that, you know, the average Roman soldier was 5'7". Well, Italians aren't very tall people, you know. Even racially, you know, Italians are they kind of look like Spaniards. They kind of like have darker skin and stuff. I saw a fresco of Pompeii, which is just south of Rome, you know, just on the outside of Naples, of a Pompeian couple, and the husband was brown. The husband looked like he had brown skin, looked like Ralph Macchio. He was like a Sicilian, you know. Romans weren't like white people, you know. In fact, they were more brown then than they are now, probably, because Rome was taken over by Germans, by the Visigoths. So anyways, so basically that's the rule of thumb I like to use. Keeps it simple, makes it like, helps you feel like history wasn't so far away. And it's true. I mean, when the Romans took over the Gauls, which are the blood descendants of Germans, you know, they said the Gauls were really tall. Well, Germans are a lot taller than the Italians, you know. Now, you know, the reason that I think that they were taller and stuff is that, you know, Italy isn't a very arable place. They were eating grain, you know, not a whole lot of protein. Just didn't get big. Same thing with the Greeks. You know, Greece is a very rocky place. They were eating goats, but not that many goats. You know, just